Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our members of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine our show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience at SmithWeekly, including Andy C., Stephen W., at Eric101, Alan B., Luke O., and Ken D. Returning to the show today is George Glasier. George is president and CEO of Western Uranium and Vanadium, a U.S.-focused project developer and explorer with his core Sunday Mine project in Colorado. The company is listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange under the symbol WUC and also on the U.S. OTC markets under the symbol WSTRF. Mr. Glasier, welcome back to the show. And do you have your favorite beverage in hand, sir?
I sure do. Thank you.
Well, George, it's been a while since we've chatted. It's been over a year. Why don't you give us your take on the current uranium market here?
Okay, well, as everybody that follows the market kind of knows, the uranium prices have recovered a little bit because of the pandemic and the shutdown of various mines around the world. We're still at a price that probably doesn't justify much new production, but if you take a look at all the analysts that cover the sector and look at the supply demand, clearly we're going to be in a deficit when it comes to supply within the next year or two. And that's going to has to lead to higher uranium prices, or you won't get the production needed to cover that supply. So I think even though the spot uranium price hasn't skyrocketed yet, it's certainly, we expect it to do that simply because there will not be a supply unless the price goes up. And that's just not my opinion. That's the opinion of most of the analysts that follow this market. So we're very bullish on what's going to happen in the uranium market in the next 2 years, and of course what's going to happen to the companies that are in the business. I think they're all poised to do well as uranium prices increase.
Well, George, let's get into Western here. How about you just update us, because it's been a while, current capital structure, including the shares outstanding, cash on hand, and the major shareholders at this point?
Well, as you know from our press releases, we just finished a capital raise of 5 million Canadian. We had warrants come in that were in the money, well into the money, for another 2 million Canadian. Outstanding shares are about 40 billion right now, and our cash is about 7 million Canadian. So that cash we just received, virtually we had cash coming into the raise and cash, so we didn't really spend any of it, but we have about 7 million in cash. So we're in the best financial condition the company's ever been in since the founding a few years ago and going public. Now that we've got cash in the bank, we've got plans to do a number of things, but that's where we are cash-wise and share outstanding. We're still pretty tight shareholding. I'm still the largest shareholder with around 5 million shares. Each time we do a raise, I diluted a little bit. I was going to participate in the last raise, and we were basically oversubscribed, and there was no room for basically myself to come in. But I certainly support the company, and I think it's a great investment.
And George, yeah, your ownership's somewhere in the 15% range, roughly, last I checked anyway. What price do you have your shares at this point?
The price of my shares, well, again, they're just, based on founder shares. I've not sold anything. The original shares that we issued to the founders for putting in the properties. The price of my shares basically are related to market, not cost.
Well, George, let's move on here to the Sunday project here. With the capital in the bank, what can investors expect to be accomplished by the end of this year at this project? What is the plan?
Again, we were kind of shut down by the virus, COVID. As you know, we were in operations in February 2020, building ore pads to move the ore that we had already mined from the Sunday complex, and COVID hit. And obviously in Colorado, there were orders for most companies to shut down and to social distance. Well, mining is a difficult thing to social distance because miners are in close contact. So we did shut down. We suspended all operations. And now that COVID is, I'm not saying it's over, but it's pretty much under control, especially in western Colorado, we are preparing the next step with the Sunday mine, and that would be to reopen the mine and continue the work that we were doing back in early 2020 and late 19. As you know, the 4 mines are fully permitted. We produced ore, we left it in the mines until the ore pads were built. So we expect during the rest of this year that we will start operations again at the Sunday mine and do the same things we were doing. We'll mine ore, we'll develop new areas of the mine so we can expand production. When that uranium price goes up, ore production is going to be in great demand. There's no doubt about it, because if you get the price the production is basically feasible at, there won't be enough production for a number of years, because even though there's a lot of resources in the world, they're not production ready. If you take a look at the Sunday complex, it's one of the few mines that's in standby that could be in production within a month. There just aren't other facilities like that. Most of these facilities are not permitted at the other deposits, no permits, and no development, no infrastructure. So our mines, we believe, will be in great demand to fill that first round of contracting when it comes out, when the price goes up. And that's kind of what we're planning for the Sunday complex. Not a great detail. We'll be putting out more information as the details are available as to when we're able to start it. Obviously, it won't take long. We're already talking to, lining up the necessary people to do that, and they're available. It's not a lack of people. People are waiting to go back to work in our area. So we think it'll be a fairly easy startup, and we'll make some announcement of that once we basically finalize the startup plans.
George, I appreciate that. So basically in Colorado, instead of, coming in and implementing protocols, et cetera, the time frame post May, June 2020, no protocols were put in place, and you guys just decided to hang it up. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, it's protocols for mines, obviously are distancing, and in the mines where the workers are very closely, it's hard to stay 6 feet apart. It's hard to, they do wear, dust control, but, it's not masked like protocol calls. So it would have been difficult to make those calls. And again, there was probably no reason to keep operating. We were again waiting for the price to go up. We saw it go up a little bit because of COVID. But I think now we can anticipate the price increase not too far off. It'll make these mines totally economic. So, the shutdown and the period of time we shut down because of COVID probably didn't hurt us. It might have even said, okay, we're delaying until the price. And again, if you take a look at our capital structure and the cash, we didn't have a great deal of cash. When we opened the mine, and of course this is in our financials, we opened the mine, we spent well over $1 million in that period that we were open. And then again, we were set to do a capital raise, but it delayed the capital raise, obviously, because we didn't need the cash, because we basically shut down. So that was probably good also for the situation of our capital and our cash.
George, ideas have been thrown around, but do you have any definitive plans at this point, or maybe one method over the other as far as processing material coming out of Sunday? What's your thoughts, and what's the update on those decisions?
Well, processing the ore, obviously, the White Mesa Mill, Energy Fuels White Mesa Mill, is the only operating mill today. And we believe that obviously that's a great mill. It's got great capacity. The one thing they don't have the capacity to fill it with their own ore. So we believe Energy Fuels, when the price is right, will turn that mill on and accept ore from all kinds of independents that are able to produce and deliver into that mill. So obviously, we don't have a contract. They're not opening the mill yet. But when that happens, Energy Fuels is the logical candidate to process ore from this whole area. And of course, when Denison was operating back in the mill back in 2009, 2010, a good part of the feed for that mill came from the Sunday Mine Complex, which they owned at that time. So it only makes sense that Energy Fuels would be the logical place to process the ore. If that doesn't happen, obviously, if they don't start the mill or unable or unwilling to take independent ore, then there's other options like building a new mill. That's not impossible. I always tell people a mill is just a piece of iron. It's like building anything, an automobile. But building an automobile without fuel is worthless, doesn't go anywhere. Having a mill without resource in order to feed it is worthless also. So again, I think the key is we've got the ore, they've got the mill, and it should come together on a mutually beneficial arrangement, which we think it will when the price of uranium and when Energy Fuels is ready to start that mill. That's why we're prepared to spend some money, start up the mine, and get it ready for full production. So it's one of the sources that could be shipping this ore to the mill to feed the needs. And obviously, when the contracting starts, when the utilities start to issue these long-term contracts, they're going to want to see where the production's going to come from. You can say you got 6 million pounds of mill capacity, but they want to know if you got 6 million pounds of ore capacity. So that's going to be the key. If they want these contracts, and we've seen it before. Once the price goes up and the contracts are issued, there's enough production in the world, there will be enough to fill those contracts, and then the price could go back down. But again, you've got to be in a position to take those contracts when that price goes up. And we saw it the last go around when the price went up and you could have gotten contracts at $80. Most companies didn't. They thought it was going higher. And then the price dropped. So I think this time around, I think companies are a little smarter. They will grab those high-priced contracts, those term contracts, but they've got to show the capability of producing into those contracts.
Yeah, well said. It'll be interesting to see how the plan A goes with you and Mark sitting down and discussing, terms there. Obviously, price will be a big important deal on any kind of toll agreement. And then also at Sunday, plan B, if you were to do a small mill, George, what do you think the complexities are going to be to permit something like that at Sunday?
Well, you wouldn't do it at the Sunday. You would pick a site, and quite frankly, I've told my investors it wouldn't be in Colorado. We already did that. The state did not support us even after they issued the license. On a technicality, they revoked the license. Colorado would not be my choice. I would go to Utah. Sunday Mine is not far from Utah. You could easily haul to Utah. And Utah is a more friendly state for mining and that kind of development. We've already looked at sites there. There's a number of sites, good sites that have water, have power. Obviously, you'd have to go through the permitting, and that takes time. But it's not impossible. Building a mill is just simply time and money, and it can be done. And if it needs to be done, because there's not access to another mill, it will be done. If the price goes high enough, there's enough other, producers in this business in this area that could combine their collective assets to build a new mill. Now, Energy Fuels says that's not necessary. They've got full capacity. Well, if they open the capacity to everybody, that'll be fine. But if they don't, then the others will be forced to take the next step, and that'll be to move into the phase of the first permitting for a new mill, probably in Utah.
Very well. Utah's a smart choice. George, there's been some chatter regarding a second production source. What are the details on that? And is this anticipated at Sunday Complex or elsewhere?
Well, no, we've got another complex with a technical report on. It's called the Rafael Project. It's up by Green River, Utah. It's a very good area. It's been mined in the past. And we're starting on the permitting. It's not permitted. There's some development in the area, some old mines, whether we use those for access or whether we do new access. We're in the process now of engineering how we would mine that deposit. Now that's several years away from where we could actually start. But if you don't start, you never get there, and that's the interesting thing. We hear a lot of people doing drilling, but hardly anybody's doing any permitting on any new mines. And so this is the next step that we're in. And the initial planning, once we got this cash in place, to use some of that cash to take that project forward. So that could be an excellent project that could be fed to the White Mesa Mill or a new mill in that area. So that's the next project, and you can take a look at the technical report on that. They're drilled out pounds. It's very good grade, and it's in a friendly area. It's in the area of Green River, Utah. So that would be the project that we're primarily talking about for our next production area. Now, within the Sunday mine, we're going to develop new production areas that have never been developed. In fact, when Denison actually was operating mine, they were, just before they shut it down, in the process of developing new areas that had never even been mined before, with new resources that have never been reported. So the Sunday mine will not be the second production center, but it will be an increased production center because of an increased area that we can mine out of.
On Sunday, what uranium price level should investors expect for you to, start operations up at Sunday, get to a continuous operation? I assume no further action there will really be taken until, of course, the right price is reached. Is that correct?
Well, I think as I said earlier in this interview, we intend to do some activity at the Sunday mine starting fairly soon, even though the price may not be where we'd like it to be. We're doing it in anticipation because when that price goes up, we want to be able to go into full production and maximize the production coming out of that mine. And if you wait until the price goes up, then you've got that delay. So we're going to anticipate within a year the price will be where we want it to be. But during that first year, there'll be limited operations at the Sunday mine being ready for that price increase. And so we'll basically have capacity or potential full capacity of mining. So that's, and again, where that price is depends on, obviously, when and if Energy Fuel starts that mill, because, we've got plenty of ore, but we've got to have a way to turn that into cash, and that's through a mill. And again, we'll have to see if the price is moving up fast enough for Energy Fuels to decide to turn that mill on. And if they turn the mill on, they're going to need milk to feed. And that's really what drives the continued operation. But I think in this near term, we're going to start on a limited basis. We're not going to have the full crews in there, but we're going to have crews in there. When we turn on full scale, then we need to hire a lot more people, obviously, because that'll go into full scale mining. And that's when the price has to be higher. And I can't tell you exactly where that is, but it's more triggered by Energy Fuel starting the mill than it is our cost. If you look at the current price of uranium and vanadium's about $8 a pound, even at $30 uranium. The Sunday mine complex going through the White Mesa mill could make a little bit of money. Not a lot, but it could make some. But again, it means the mill has to be open, and it's not.
George, how much tonnage do you expect to have on standby at the pad, ready to ship out?
Well, the pads are of limited size, so that's going to, limit how much we can stockpile. The idea with the pads is you stockpile and then you ship from the pads to the mill. So we're going to be able to stockpile both inside the mine and at the outside on the pads, but not huge quantities. You're not going to put 100,000 tons on those pads because they're not big enough. You could build a lot bigger pads, but the idea is you go from the mine to the pad to the truck, and then to the mill. So our first operations will not put huge quantities on the pad, but we'll be ready to do it as soon as we're ready to ship off-site.
Understood. And George, on the contracting side, you mentioned that the long-term contracts, do you plan to obtain term contracts and off-takes, or do you plan to deal direct with potentially just a trader for volumes coming out of Sunday?
Well, we wouldn't count on the traders. What we would probably do, obviously, there's two routes if Energy Fuels take it, either buy our ore and they contract with the utility, or they give us a tolling agreement. And we're up for either one of those things. So they could very well do all the marketing through, their strength. They've got a good marketing team. They've got the mill. And so there's no really reason for us to go out and get contracts. If we get a tolling agreement, then we'll get contracts. But until we get down to the detailed discussions of how and the best economics for both parties, we won't be contracting yet. Simply because we wouldn't have the final product until it goes through the mill. But we would use either ourselves as a contracting agent or through Energy Fuels. We wouldn't necessarily use a trader.
Right. Yeah, it obviously might be much easier if it just Energy Fuels took possession of the material there and took care of it, whichever way they deem once they receive it. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how you handle that one. You have some options. Let's talk another important project for the company, at least in my view, the Hansen-Taylor Ranch project. What are you doing here to advance studies on this project, permitting for the project? My suspicion is the permitting component will likely be the longest lead time and the biggest hurdle for this to become a real meaningful asset to the company. What are you doing on this front at Hansen-Taylor?
Well, again, the original plan before we bought Black Range, and they had come up with their mining plan to use the ablation technology to mine that project, borehole mining, ablate it, and then ship it off to an outside mill. Well, with the delays and what has been determined, what we now have to do to permit ablation at a site, that makes it a little bit more complex. It's almost like building a mill. So again, we're in the stages now of just waiting to see if anything happens. And there is a movement afoot, in Congress to declare that ablation is not a mining process, or not a milling process. It's a mining process. And again, it's just a long road to do that. But if that happens, ablation could be used, and that could be the preferred mining method. The other mining method that would certainly work at Hansen-Taylor is in situ recovery. And we've considered that, but we haven't started permitting either one until we decide, obviously, if ablation will be permittable on some reasonable basis. That's the best way to do it. The secondary way to do it is mining in situ, which is not impossible. It just takes time and the background studies. But that is a potential in situ project, a good one because the ore is so thick. It's far thicker than most of the other in situ projects in the United States. And it's a good grade, and it meets the conditions of in situ mining. Again, permitting it will be the issue, but I don't think it'd be impossible to permit it, but it would take time. So the Hansen-Taylor is just down the road. It's certainly a good asset, but it's not one that we're counting on for near-term cash flows. Once cash flows start to come into the company, obviously, then you start spending it on those longer-term projects like the Hansen-Taylor.
George, would it make any sense, given the ablation probably a little bit more challenging and complex at this point? Would it be easier just to go ahead and head down the road of ISR at this point and at least get some of that initial lower cost, in my view, studies done and the permitting process started? Because I suspect in Colorado, that's going to take at least a few years to get that thing permitted at a minimum.
Right. And again, it all takes money. And so we've got a certain amount of capital now, a certain amount of cash, which we're going to put into a couple things as we progress with these, kind of first projects, and the next would be to allocate cash to the permitting of the Hansen-Taylor. But again, we don't have unlimited cash, so we have to proceed on the projects probably make the most sense early on, which is a Sunday mine, the San Rafael, and then move into that. And again, if we wanted to go out and raise another, sum of money, maybe we should do it. And maybe it's not very diluted to our shareholders, not at our current share price. But again, that's one thing we're looking at, and maybe that's what we should do, and then have enough cash to move into the Hansen-Taylor project. But again, shareholders are always saying, don't raise money unless you've got a real good reason for it. We don't want to be diluted. So again, I think that makes sense. But to look at our share price versus our last raise, it might make sense in the next, few months to consider doing another capital raise to do the next things. And again, we haven't really announced what we're spending this $7 million for yet. These are, we're just on this interview. It's the first time I've really had any interview since PDAC of 2020. Now, that's been a long time since we've had a few little press releases, but we haven't announced anything. So as we announce things, people will understand what we plan to do with our existing cash, and then what additional cash we might need to expand beyond the current, plans for the next year and a half.
Understood. Depending, I guess, on how you permit it, whether you do it in-house or you have a group of consultants work on that. Colorado, to my knowledge, is not an agreement state, so most likely that lead time for permitting out there is going to be at least 2 to 3 years, George. Is that about right? You know the permitting in Colorado much more than I do. What's the time frame?
Yeah. For an in situ permit, yeah, I'd say 2 to 3 years. And obviously, we'd use a lot of outside consultants. There's no reason to, have gear up and do it all in-house. Some of it could be done in-house. But any kind of big permitting process would be, best handled by individual outside experts that have done it before. And so, yeah, but you're looking at 2 to 3 years for a permit, I think, for that project. From the time to start, there's been some background data collected, obviously, on that. There's monitor wells in there. There's some information from the past, obviously. It was permitted as an open pit mine with that from the 70s. Now that data is out of it. It's certainly not current, but it's a database that we have, so we're not starting from scratch on that project. So, but I think 2 to 3 years from the time we say go on it is probably realistic.
The company has made mention of its Bowlin property, which is subject to oil and gas exploration. The company has stated that the interest in this property is not material, yet it has been the topic of press releases and also within company presentations. What is the arrangement with Mallard Exploration, George? If the wells on your interest are completed, assuming production levels are similar to regional operations, what would be a ballpark royalty income on an annual basis for that?
Well, again, we've said it's not a material asset. We don't know what the royalty stream will be. Their production levels could come and go. It depends on the price of oil. And again, they're drilling wells. They've had the first ones in. They're going to drill more. But again, it's really hard for us to estimate what our royalty stream will be. And that's why we're not saying this is a major asset. Certainly there could be cash flows coming from it. And outsiders have estimated what they think maybe our stream would be. But we're really not in a position. We're not an oil and gas company. We've had that asset. It's just a passive asset. It will be a cash flow at some point. But to tell you what the royalty stream would be, I don't know. And we have not hired independent experts to tell us at this point, because until they finish their initial drilling program and do the fracking on those wells and decide to put them into production, it's all speculative. Again, right now they've got to do some pipelines, not major pipelines. We've granted an easement across our property for a pipeline, but that has not yet been built. So any production out of that new area is going to have to be trucked. So again, there's a number of things that these oil and gas companies need to do to get into full production. And they certainly can truck it, but it'd be far better to build that pipeline. It's not an extensive pipeline, but it needs to be built to get into full production. And these are the little things that we talk to them about, but they haven't committed as to when they're going to do any of this, even production. They may drill these wells and shut them in, and if the price of oil drops back down to $30 or $40, at 60 or 65, it's probably feasible. But it's not in our control how much they produce or when they produce. Our cash flow, our royalties is based on production. So it's a good asset, but I don't want shareholders to think this thing's going to drive the value of our company. What's going to drive the value of Western is the uranium vanadium values that come out of our mineral assets there. And any oil and gas royalties we get is just a plus. And I know there's speculation that it could be substantial, but I don't want to represent that to the investors that is what they should be investing in Western for. It's certainly going to be a good asset, but it's not our prime asset. It never has been. But look at our uranium vanadium assets, and that's what the value of this company should be based on.
George, are there any other oil and gas companies in that region that are operating right now?
Well, Weld County has produced oil and gas for 40 years. It's not big production wells. They're constant producers. They produce for a long time. And now with the fracking technology that they're using up there, they're going to be able to increase production from other areas But again, Weld County has been a big production area in Colorado for a long, long time. And this is just an extension of the areas that they've been producing. So there are a number of companies up there that are producing. And so they're just kind of expanding that out beyond where the first production was. So we expect, the resources there and the cost of production. Obviously, when you put more money into deeper and fractured wells, it costs more. But again, I think with the price of oil at 60 or 65 or whatever it is, it probably justifies those more expensive wells. But Weld County has been producing for years and years, and it comes and goes with the price of oil.
George, for investors who want to follow this, I would suggest they would look at some of these news releases that you guys have put out specifically about the interest and the royalty numbers. My suspicion is they should just look to contact Mallard Exploration directly and have a conversation with them about what a reasonable production level would be out there. And then they can make some assumptions on when, if this even happens. There seems to be a while there before there could be some potential, but is there a contact at Mallard Exploration that they can reach out to?
Well, and again, I'm not sure Mallard is willing to give out a lot of information. We've contacted them. They're certainly willing to talk to us as a royalty owner, but they're a little bit closed mouth about what they're going to do. Obviously, they're one of the producers in that area, and they've got competition. And oil companies, technically, they don't have to release all the data, even though they may be public. A lot of this information is very confidential, what they hit, their techniques and things like that. So I'm not sure how much they're willing to tell people or commit as to when production will be and how much production. Mallard could even be in a position that they develop these wells and sell them to a bigger operator. And again, I'm not sure how much information anybody could get from Mallard. We do periodically talk to them, and we get reports on what they're doing, but they will not basically give us estimates and things like that yet. And again, they're not obligated under our lease. They don't have to do it, so they're just not doing it.
Yeah, and I believe they're a private company, but look, folks who have interest, I don't see the importance of this, but I really don't care either. But the bottom line of it is, if you want to track it down, you can look at comparable companies in the area. You can look at other wells, historic production. There's information out there, and you can kind of sort out roughly
you can get that.
Some sensitivities on oil price.
And that's what some of our investors have already done, I understand. So, and they know far more about it than we do. I don't want to do a lot of research and represent something to the market that I'm really not, that knowledgeable about. It's an asset. We've leased it. It's in an operator's, hands right now. But again, that's fine. And investors want to inquire into it and speculate on the value, and it's fine. But we, as the company, won't do that.
Yeah, we'll leave it to them to get that sorted out, George. I think that the dollars of this are in what you guys are doing and your guys' ability to actually execute and deliver, not a little oil and gas royalties on a little bit of property. So, well, George,
Right.
Mergers and acquisitions, any plans on this front? Any thoughts on M&A in this sector?
Well, we're always looking at opportunities. Obviously, we've been looking over the last few years. And again, I think one of the biggest problems of any merger or acquisition has been the low valuations of companies or assets. Nobody was willing to do anything at low valuations. That's been a problem. You go in and somebody's got a good property you're interested in picking up, and what you could justify in today's market isn't what they want. So it's been rather difficult to find any properties that people are willing to deal at a reasonable price. Now, that may be changing. They may say this is the time to do it, and valuations are going up. And we're always looking for the right properties. But again, we've got a big resource. We don't need exploration properties as much as we need production properties. I'm not saying we're not looking at some exploration plays, but clearly in the U.S., we're looking at staying in the U.S. We're not going to Africa. We're not going to lose Canada. There's enough companies there. We're really going to stay in the U.S., the Western U.S., where we understand the geology, we understand the mining issues. But yeah, we are looking at things. And we've had talks with a number of companies about mergers and acquisitions, but they haven't gone anywhere. And whether they go somewhere in the future, we don't know. And we're always up for it. Whether somebody wants to buy out Western, we're willing to do that at the right price, or whether there's a company we merge with and become the controlling company. All those things are on the table, but I don't see anything right now in the next couple of months that we can announce, but maybe a small deal that we might be able to get into, but nothing major, simply because everybody is waning. I think there's going to be consolidations in the industry. Certainly, we've got a lot of little companies in this thing with some assets. What we need to do is we need to have bigger companies that have the capability of developing mines and mills, and I think that'll happen as the uranium price goes up. Back in the 70s and 80s, as you know, in the United States, when the U.S. was the largest producer, big mining companies were in, the oil and gas companies were in the uranium business. Whether they come back in, of course, there's pressure on the oil and gas companies to become green, and how more can you be green than having a uranium production center? I think it's possible that some of the big oil come back in the uranium business. It's a small sector compared to the oil and gas revenues, but so is solar and so is wind. So that could be something that we see in the future, and that could be a source of substantial amount of money coming into this industry if and when it happens.
It's unfortunate that people haven't been able to get together and actually do some of these deals that should have been done really 2016 through today. And even today, the values are very still reasonable, splitting hair levels really to still be able to make deals. But, look, if people aren't amenable to doing deals, there's other ways to get these things done, maybe not in a friendly manner, but nonetheless can get done if you have the right people, the right capital, and the right strategy. So we'll see what happens there. So you can confirm definitely, though, there has been discussions. You guys have had discussions, but they haven't gone anywhere. That is the case today.
Yes, I can confirm we've had discussions with a number of companies, a number of resource holders. It's ongoing, You always have to be out there in front trying to see what's going on, see if there's opportunities, and we've been doing that. And that takes a lot of my time between investors and those kind of things, and operations. That's what I spend most of my time doing, as we have done that.
How about plans to uplist the shares to the Toronto Venture Exchange, George? I know the Canadian Securities Exchange is okay, but the bottom line of it is it's not the most desirable exchange in Canada. And of course, the TSX is even better. But any plans to at least get listed on the Venture Exchange?
And that's a possibility. We've looked at that over the past few years. Probably the cost didn't justify it, and our cash position didn't justify it. But that's something now, obviously, that we should consider. And we are looking at that constantly and seeing if we can have a better trading arrangement for our investors in the TSXV. Maybe, we're very satisfied with the CSE. It's grown considerably. Obviously, it's probably not the TSXV yet, but we haven't had nearly the comments on it that we used to have when we first were listed there. But again, that's always something under consideration. But bear in mind, we keep a very limited staff, and the things we have to do administratively and comply with all the regulations takes a lot of our time, and a new listing would add work. Our CFO, Rob Klein, basically handles all of our compliance issues as well as the financial things. So we keep a very limited staff. Obviously, we can do it through consultants. We could hire, and we do have counsel in Canada that's prepared to do that for us. But it's just spending some more money, and it's one of the things we want to spend money on is it's going to justify it. And maybe it is. Our share price has done well lately, as you know. We've been trading on the CSE, so I don't know if it would be a real benefit to shareholders quite yet. At some point, we probably would really seriously consider it. And maybe that's coming sooner rather than later. But, again, with cash in the bank, projects scheduled, to go, and we're going to have to decide what we do with our existing cash. Obviously, that's something we should consider, and we will.
Yeah, George, you guys need to do that. You have a market cap of around 80 million U.S. You have the OTC listing, which is, I think, a pretty high level OTC listing, if I recall. Certainly getting on the venture exchange makes a lot of sense for access. You guys expand the availability as well. And Rob certainly can do that. It's probably not too difficult for him to be able to do that. So your guys' size, the point in time in this market, getting to the venture exchange is still, generally an entry exchange, and maybe there's a target in the long term, late stages in this cycle to get on the TSX. But
good advice. I listen to guys like you, so that's good advice. Some of our investors tell me the same thing. So that's good advice. I'm always interested in what, advice is out there on how to improve, the arrangement for our investors. And so I appreciate the advice. And I will get Rob on to, the details of considering this now that we've got our annuals filed. We've got, of course, our AGM coming up in June. We'll get that data out. We've got other things, we've had the warrants. It took a lot of his effort, bringing in these warrants. So now he's kind of cleared his plate so we can move maybe to the next projects, and this may be one we should move into. Thank you.
I think you guys are of the size to easily be able to absorb that at this point, but I think it's time to go ahead and start making that move here. Well, George, you have a group of investors. You kind of have a fan base on that side, and then you've also got some skeptics. Some market participants and capital groups have pointed towards Western Uranium and Vanadium as being a company that may never sell uranium. What would you say to the skeptics out there, George?
Well, I think a lot of the skeptics come out and blog against us are really not very knowledgeable. A lot of these people are anti-nukes, anti-mining, if you really get down to it. Why they pick Western, because I think they pick Western because we're close to production. And, that the antis out there are to shut down mining. And so the companies who are close to production are their targets. Now, anybody that basically looks at us, our information is public. We've got technical reports. We've got the mines open. We've got permits. And when they say, this is what happened to us, say, a year ago when those permits were being challenged, and we won all those challenges, those permits are in excellent condition, our share price suffered because of the bloggers coming out and say there's no way they're going to mine. Well, we proved them wrong because the permits are in good shape. But again, why they came out so strongly without even the knowledge of what, how we were going to fight this and maintain those permits. That was a real challenge for us. But all along, we knew those permits were valid and would be staying in valid status. But again, the skeptics on all these companies. They're skeptics. I've heard them on energy fuels. Unless maybe you're a chemical, I don't know if they're skeptics on chemical, but everybody's got their skeptics that says they can't do what they say they're going to do. We try not to overpromise. We try to say what we're going to do and do what we say. But again, there'll always be skeptics. Some of them will be reasonable, and some of them will be just these ones that are trying to shut the industry down. And we think most of our skeptics are on the ones that are trying to shut the industry down. But now there may be some out there that have reasons to be. I would be happy to talk to them, but nobody calls me. None of these people call me to ask me questions. It's interesting. My investors that want to know the facts call me, but the guys that blog against us, they never call me. They never try to get the information from the company. Not that I can give them anything that's not public, but again, if there's an explanation they need about public information, I'd be happy to talk to them. But they never call. They never contact us.
Well, George, potential investors who are on the sidelines listening here, market cap of the company stands about $80 million US. What would you say to them at this stage and at current price levels?
Well, I think the current price level has gone up substantially. The uranium price has not gone up. I think once we see that uranium price go up substantially, then you're going to see, all the shares of all these public companies go up with it. Energy Fuels has had a nice run. UEC, UR Energy, all these U.S. producers or potential producers. But I think the big run-up in share prices is still ahead of us because uranium prices haven't come up. And the commodity price has to come up to justify the value of these companies. And you take a look at our company with a market cap of $80 million, at $30 uranium, it's probably fairly valued. At $60 uranium, is it fairly valued? Probably not. It all depends on the commodity price. And with a low commodity price at $30, I think most of these companies probably have room to go when the uranium price goes up. And maybe they're valued fully now at $30 uranium, but maybe not if it's $60 uranium.
Best way for the investors to reach out to you and the company, George?
Yeah, our website, of course, my phone number is in there, my email address. I'm always open for calls or emails. I try to always answer them in a timely manner. So certainly reach out to me. I'm open to talking to all investors, whether they're big or small. It's one of the things that I spend a lot of my time doing, and happy to do it. So my contacts are there, my phone number, my email. Please contact me and let's talk. I'd be happy to talk to you anytime.
Well, George, really appreciate you taking the time again. Thanks for coming back on the program, and good luck over at Western, and we look forward to monitoring progress.
Good. Thanks for having me. Always good to talk with you, Andrew.